The person in front of you now is Robert Hanssen, who was the head of the FBI's counterintelligence forces in America. But what no one knew is that this same man is the spy who leaked America's most dangerous information to the Russian army. Imagine that the spy that America had been searching for 20 years was in a key position at the FBI. In order to know how this man was leaking information and what is the genius way America discovered him, we must go back in time a little. In 1986, the FBI, in cooperation with the American intelligence, began investigating a security breach that occurred in America. What happened was that spies working for America began to disappear one after the other. Among the most important spies who disappeared were Valery Martinov and Sergei Motorin, and these two in particular were America's eyes with which it saw. Their disappearance was not just a coincidence. Something abnormal happened. A few days later, America received news that all the spies who disappeared were dead. Of course, this was a clear warning that there was someone inside America itself who would reveal the identity of the spies and hand them over to the enemy. Here, the FBI and the American intelligence began to form a team of the strongest investigators to investigate this incident and find out who the traitor among them was. The leader of the investigation team was Robert Hanssen, who was a senior member of the FBI. This mystery remained unsolved for a long time, and America's spies were still missing and no one knew who was behind all this. What America did not take into account was that the traitor or spy they were searching for with all their might was the same Robert Hanssen, the head of the team that was formed to uncover the traitor. Perhaps you would like to know what dangerous information Robert Hanssen leaked to the Soviet intelligence and the genius way Robert was sending them information. The most important question of all this is how the American intelligence discovered him and was able to arrest him. If we come to see the life of Robert, who was born on April 18, 1944 in Chicago, his father was an officer in the American Navy and later a police officer, but he was not an ordinary father. He was a strong and strict man who knew nothing but rules and discipline. Home for Robert was not suitable for comfort. His father made him feel that he was always in a training field. Every mistake has a price, and every action must be calculated. Robert, since he was young, was an introverted and very intelligent child, but his intelligence was not enough to escape his father's cruelty. And this is what created inside Robert a fire of anger, hatred, and a love of secrecy and mystery. When Robert grew up and entered school, he was not the type who liked to mix with people. On the contrary, he spent most of his time reading books and stories about espionage and spies. He had a strange passion for everything related to intelligence, meaning that he was obsessed with the idea of control and knowing people's secrets without being discovered. After he grew up and entered university, he studied data management and computer systems. After Robert finished his university studies, the natural step for him was to look for a job in the field of information and security systems, and he actually began his working life in a normal job as a computer engineer. But Robert felt that he could be more than just an employee who sits in front of a screen. And indeed, in 1971, he decides to enter the world of law enforcement like his father, and works there as an officer in the Chicago Police Department. While working in the police, Robert began to attract the attention of his superiors with his high analytical abilities and computer skills, and the intelligence missions that involved data analysis, which he carried out with great intelligence. But at the same time, Robert was frustrated because he saw himself as smarter than all his colleagues in the police department, and for him, this job became boring and no longer had the excitement he dreamed of. Robert wanted to be on the dark side, and this is what made him take the most dangerous decision in his life. What happened was that Robert received an offer to join the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and indeed, this is what Robert had wished for all his life. Finally, he would be in the midst of the most powerful security system in the world, among people as smart as him and even smarter than him. Because of Robert's intelligence and skills, the leaders in the FBI appointed him to the Counterintelligence and Intelligence Division, and this division in the FBI cooperates with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, so anything related to espionage, it must have something to do with intelligence. Robert, because of his work in this position, was dealing with the most dangerous secret files related to the Soviet Union at that time. Because at that time the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union was in its infancy, America was recruiting spies in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union was doing the same. Robert Hansen's mission was to expose the spies recruited by the Soviet Union, and this meant that he had direct access to extremely dangerous files and American secrets. Since Robert was good at using computers, his mission in the department he worked in was to create automated databases to combat any virus or security breach coming from the Soviet Union. And every time he proved his competence and worthiness in the tasks that were given to him. Here, Robert, because of his love for the field of information and intelligence, began to think that instead of me chasing spies, why shouldn't I be the spy that no one could chase? His arrogance that he was smarter than the state and the law was a big reason for him to take this step. And indeed, after 3 years of working with the FBI, specifically in 1979, Robert went himself to the Soviet embassy that was located in New York. He went to the Soviet military intelligence office and left a message on the desk and left. He told them in the message that he works in counterespionage at the FBI and offers them his services. At the end of the message, he left them a means of communication through which they could communicate and wrote them a pseudonym. As soon as the Soviet intelligence saw the message, they realized that Robert Hansen was an irreplaceable treasure. Indeed, the Soviet leadership agreed to recruit Robert Hansen. From 1979 until 2001, that is, for nearly 20 years, Robert Hansen was leaking secret files from the FBI and sending them to the Soviet intelligence. The Soviet Union, in order to reward him, gave him hundreds of thousands of dollars because the information was very important to the Soviet Union. One of the most important pieces of information he leaked to the Soviet intelligence was that the FBI was building a tunnel under the Soviet embassy in New York to spy on their private communications. This tunnel cost millions of dollars to build, but when Robert Hansen delivered this information to the Soviet intelligence, they stopped making any secret communications from inside the embassy. And things continued like this, with Robert taking information from America and leaking it to the Soviet Union, and he started telling them what we talked about at the beginning of the video. He started telling them the names of the American spies inside the Soviet Union, and the Soviet intelligence was arresting these spies and ending their lives immediately. But one day, while he was writing a letter to the Soviet intelligence in the basement of his house, he was surprised to find his wife entering. And the biggest disaster was that she read the letter and knew that he was not only betraying her, but also betraying his country. Because I forgot to tell you that Robert Hansen had affairs and betrayed his wife, and she exposed him more than once. Robert Hansen tried to justify the letter to his wife and told her that he was sending wrong information to the enemy, but his wife is not stupid, and she knew that he was betraying his country, and she kept trying with him to stop this action for a very long time. And indeed, Robert felt a little remorse and cut off all contact with the Soviets for 5 years, and during this period he was promoted in his job and became a supervisor there in the counterespionage department. But after about 5 years, specifically in 1985, Robert decided to return to espionage operations for the Soviet Union. The first letter he received from the Soviet Union after his return was sent by one of the Soviet intelligence who was in America. The content of the letter was to expose a spy working for the American intelligence. Not much time passed, and he sent another letter in which he exposed 3 other spies. And inside the letter he asked for $100,000 and told them that he would compensate them for the past 5 years. And indeed, the Soviet Union fulfilled all his requests and more. Imagine that they were sending him jewels, and until this moment you must know that he was dealing with them under an alias, which was Raymond Garcia. And he had a puppet way of sending the letter. He would put adhesive tape on a sign near a certain bridge. If the tape was lengthwise, it meant that Robert had left a message. And a few days later, a Soviet agent would come and take the message and change the tape from lengthwise to widthwise, and this is how they remained throughout all the years. But the worst of all this was his betrayal of his wife. Imagine that he was taking pictures of his wife while she was naked and sending them to his friend and telling him to enjoy the moral support. This letter reveals to you that Robert was not just a traitor, he was a psychopath. At the same time, there was a federal agent named Mark. This man, since he was a family friend, Robert Hansen, was always visiting their house. And one day, Robert Hansen's wife told Mark that she started receiving a lot of money in the house, and the amount of money did not fit at all with the nature of Robert's work. In 1993, the Soviet Union had collapsed, and Robert had stopped spying, but decided to return to spying for Russia because it also hated America. However, he faced a problem in that he did not know anyone from the Russian intelligence to deal with him. After a period of searching, he was able to track down a member of the Russian intelligence in America, and Robert ignored him and gave him a message that he was offering them his services as a spy. The informant actually sent the message to the leaders in Russia, but the big disaster was that this message was directed to one of the American spies inside Russia, and he went to send the contents of the message to America and told them that there was someone from the Federal Bureau of Investigation working as a spy and leaking dangerous information. At that time, the American intelligence went to all the units of the FBI to search for the name Raymond Garcia, and she went to the head of the FBI's counterintelligence division, Robert Hanssen himself, and told them that there was no one by that name. In 1999, Russian President Putin announced that Russia would return to the world stage, which meant that it needed spies inside America, its #1 enemy. Indeed, Robert took advantage of the opportunity and offered his services again, and the Russians agreed to recruit him for their benefit. Here, America felt that there was still information leaking and getting out to Russia, and the only agency under attention was the FBI. So, senior investigators were appointed to solve this mystery, so that the investigation could develop with them, and they would discover that the traitor was one of the FBI leaders. Not only that, but he had been leaking information for more than 20 years. What they knew all of this was that there were secret files that had been handed over to the Soviet Union from within the FBI in the 90s and 80s. The important thing is that after that, members of the FBI traveled to Russia under false identities and began to meet with former informants. In the Soviet Union, they went to each one and told him that we can make him a millionaire with one piece of information that you will give us. And this information is that you tell us who the spy who works for the FBI is. Of course, there was more than one Russian informant who did not speak, but one, after they pressured him, handed them a recording tape and a cover in which he received the information that he took from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. When the investigators returned with these things to America and began examining the fingerprints on the cover, the shock was because they found on it the fingerprints of the head of the counterintelligence department in the FBI, who is Robert Hanssen, who confirmed this to them. While they were reviewing the recording tape, they heard a voice very similar to Robert Hanssen's voice as he was leaking information from inside the FBI. Of course, all of this was enough to prove the charges against Hanssen, but the American intelligence insisted on catching him red-handed. The first thing the American intelligence did was offer a fake promotion to Robert Hanssen so that he would work in the upper leadership, and he actually agreed, and in the year 2001, Robert Hanssen was transferred to another FBI office, but this office was full of cameras, microphones, and spying devices. They even told him that since we promoted him, he needed a bigger house in a more upscale area. They actually gave Robert Hanssen a house, every corner of which was rigged with cameras, microphones, and spying devices. In order to monitor Robert's every move, they appointed an assistant named Eric. This assistant was always with Robert, and whatever Robert did, Eric would pass on to the American intelligence. Imagine that the intelligence appointed more than 300 agents just to monitor Robert Hanssen and track his every move. And indeed, one day the FBI, in cooperation with the American intelligence, knew that Robert was ready to send information to the Russian intelligence service, and at that moment a group of agents moved and went to the bridge under which Robert was throwing messages, and a second group tracked Robert as he was going to the bridge. On that day, which was February 18th, 2001, and specifically at 4:34, Robert had reached the bridge with the message he had with him, and suddenly, as you can see, he finds all the FBI agents waiting over his head with machine guns and weapons to actually catch him red-handed. One of the FBI agents, while arresting Robert at that moment, looked at him sadly and said to him, "This is a bad day for all of us." He wanted to tell him that we did not imagine that the blow would come from you. On July 6th, 2001, Robert Hanssen confessed to everything and was charged with 15 counts related to espionage. Before he heard the judge's ruling, he stood up to give a speech in front of the court. "I apologize for my behavior and I feel ashamed of it. I opened the door to defamation of my wife and my completely innocent children. I hurt many people severely, and they estimated it by spending his life in a maximum security prison until the day of June 5th, 2023, which is almost 2 years ago. Today, when they entered the cell, they found him dead. Robert Hanssen passed away at the age of 79. Thus, Robert Hanssen's life ended, and with him, today's story ended. In the end, I hope you liked the story. Thank you.